Welcome to the Parts and Labor Podcast, the podcast that explores the strategies, systems, and stories that drive salon success. I'm Alicia, founder and CEO of Salon Scale.
And I'm Whitney, head of sales here at Salon Scale.
And welcome to the Parts and Labor Podcast. I feel like I'm on tonight's 2020. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Parts and Labor Podcast. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Whitney.
So today we're going to get into, why don't we take our audience here on the Salon Eras tour?
Popular.
Yeah, what is that? Let's break that down. So essentially, a few weeks ago, Whit and I headed to lovely Miami, where it was not frosty.
No.
We're used to frosty. But headed to Miami and had to do a presentation, right? And I didn't want to do a typical presentation. I wanted to spice it up a bit. And I wanted to really talk about why parts and labor. Why do we need this in our salon world? And then I went on my own self-discovery of, the evolution of salons, how they started, and how did we start paying hairdressers? How were they compensated? And how did we factor in things that were trending or changing, like color and all that stuff. So as I went through and dived through that and did a deep dive through that, anyways, as I went through it, I realized that there was a lot of things that are, coming to light that we are now facing today.
And yeah, when she says she did a deep dive, she means that. Unfortunately, it was about, 12 hours before you had to give the presentation in Miami, but you got it done. Like, you really pulled through. You delivered an absolute banger. And I think that what you shared was really enlightening. And it's just kind of we've been through this before, it's really eye-opening. So anyway, I'll stop talking and just kind of let you get through it.
I honestly, this is going to be one of the most fascinating kind of breakdowns. I think, yes, it was 2 a.m. when I hit send. For sure.
They asked for a week before.
Yeah,
by the way.
I think actually before that, but I was like, it's coming.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think, the whole,
it's coming.
Yeah, it'll be there. Maybe it's your inbox, so I'm not sure. We work in tech.
Yeah.
But
professionals.
Exactly. Okay, so it all started with me visualizing this whole timeline, and I wanted to go back to really how this all happened. So when I broke it down, it started, the very first salon ever was created was in the 1900s. And this kind of movement started this was the stylists at that time would be more like factory workers. So they were like hourly rate stylists, and they were doing zero hair color because hair color didn't exist then. But there was a lot more styling that was happening, and retailing was actually a little bit higher at this time. So there was a lot more like scalp benefit treatments and stuff like that. That was kind of, the start of hair salons. And so that kind of compensation really was fixed rates. That's how they paid those stylists. And then as the evolution kind of started to evolve, we started to see by the 1920s, the invention of hair color came in. And the hair color, you can imagine then was probably fanciful, some type of toner and not very much color, right? But a lot of it was both the toner kind of side of things, and then perming. So in the 1920s, it was really, instead of trying to do roller sets and do all that stuff, they created, these chemical services that allowed you to be able to permanently curl hair. And so instead of this being kind of like a not talked about thing, it started to become something that people would want to come to a hair salon for. And so the evolution of our very first salons became hubs back in the 1950s. So this is where salons started to evolve, and there were places to go. And instead of hiding getting your hair done, it became a little bit more accepted. And because that demand increased, that's where kind of our first kind of crack at understanding, product costs are going to rise with this, and making sure that you're pricing yourself to make sure you're making money, that you're not just giving your services away. This isn't a hobby at the end of the day. And then, we entered the next era. And this is kind of the glamour era. And so this is kind of right after World War II. And this is where Hollywood took off. So we, at the end of the day, we are still heavily influenced by trend, and that heavily impacts our profitability. And so this, I believe, is where everything started going south for us. So as we started getting influenced by Hollywood, hair color became more and more. So instead of just having the Clairol's of the world, we started to see an evolution of other color manufacturers start to produce different color lines. And there was more than just one shade to choose from. So as that kind of evolved, we went from having maybe it was 50 cents a tube to now in this era, it doubled. So it was about $1 to $2 a tube that kind of came up at this time. And this started the first commission-based salon that happened in this time, which was interesting. So now we went from hourly and fixed to getting maybe some retail incentives to now we need to compensate our stylists. And so a lot of the salon owners at this time, they wanted to keep their stylists in the salons to keep producing these looks. And so they developed, a commission-based structure to be able to not only pay them and keep them in the salons, but also to capture some type of revenue to cover some of these costs. And as we know, Hollywood took off as we've seen it continue to rise, and that color doubled once again. So as we approach the 70s and we look at this kind of era, the 70s was an all-time high. Hair color is now approaching $3 a tube. So we went in just a small fraction there. We went from 50 cents a tube to $3 a tube. Mm-hmm. So in that kind of era and that kind of evolution that happened, it created a revolution. So it made that movement where we have the first indie stylist that came out, and that's the 70s. That's the rebellious kind of, I want to work for myself, freedom, everything. So the stylists, their minds at that time were, I want to work for myself. And so what we thought we just created in the last decade of hybrid salons or rental salons, it actually started in the 70s. Mm-hmm. So this is what's wild is that I was fascinated by this, is this was done before. And so in the 70s, stylists decided they wanted to work for themselves. So they rented chairs or booths, we call it, and they entered that movement. So we now watch that kind of change. And as that change happened, the trend didn't stop. So hair color started to multiply. More and more shades were coming out every single year. And what happened is the brands ended up having kind of a distribution issue. So they needed to find a way to be able to not distribute to one individual stylist all around the world. They needed to make it a lot easier for logistics. And this is where we started to get brand loyalty. So in this kind of movement, you saw the Redkins of the world and these types of salons that would be loyal to that brand, which would attract and retain their staff. So at that time, while the hair color was at an all-time high, retention in salons, commission-based salons, was an all-time low. Sounds pretty familiar. Mm-hmm. And so to help combat that, the color lines, as they expanded, they're like, well, this is how we'll fix it, is we'll just give loyalty to those salons and we'll double the cost again. So now hair color is approaching $6 a tube, right? And so as we look at it approaching this, and we're getting close to the 1990s into 2000s, this is kind of our Jennifer Aniston era, where we start to get into dimensional color now. So now we're starting to get into hair trends in patterns, not just all over color, but we're starting to see foils and other applications starting to come in that you could only come to salons that were loyal to color lines that had the latest, greatest techniques with the best stylists that worked for those brands. And so the world kind of shifted that time, and people went back into salons. They started to come back into commission-based salons, and the development of the level-based system came. So now we had a commission model, but it wasn't just a fixed kind of 30 to 60% range. Now we're looking at levels. So we're looking at a sliding scale that was created now to be able to, again, attract and retain stylists, cover replenishment or costs, and as well as keep people in salons. And so as that whole kind of movement happened and stylists were, really loyal to those salons, those costs started to increase again. And now we're approaching kind of that $10 a tube. So as the products increased, what we saw is those commission-based salons at that time, a lot of it was waste conversation. So they're very male-dominant owned salons at this time. I always call this like kind of the Hefner era, like Hugh Hefner, where there was always like, Hugh and his buddies. That's how a lot of salons were, and when we look at the 2000s in this era, it's like a lot of guys that had a bunch of girls that worked at their salon, and that was kind of the era that happened. And within it, there was a lot of conversation of, you got to write this for like strict patterns that are starting to happen where it's like, we got to write these formulas down. We got to cover these costs. Cause now, the cost per formula has now like tripled, in a very short period of time. And as the micromanaging started to creep up, they entered, the very first kind of product charges or service fees. And that kind of came like close to like around 2010, 2000 to 2010, that kind of decade that happened there. And this is where service charges came in. So it was like, aha. And all of this is being fueled by manufacturing, because manufacturing is like, we got to keep the salons loyal. We got to stay with you. Here's another way you can do it. This is another way you can cover your costs.
They
influence the business models.
Interesting.
And they wanted to keep not only the salons happy, but they wanted to keep, those costs being covered as well. They didn't want to see it go back to what happened in the 70s. They wanted to keep it loyal with those salon owners that were mass or bulk ordering. It was a lot easier for them to keep their supply going. And so as this was kind of happening and we started to get the service fees and all that stuff, hairstylists at this time, this era started to question. This is where it was like, where's all my money going? Commission-based salon owner or stylists all around, even myself, I was part of this, where it was like, where's all my money? Like I'm bringing in $10,000, $15,000 a month, but my check is like $3,000, $4,000.
And that's even with a service charge, right?
Yes. Like what is going on? And I was convinced that my salon owner was taking all the money, that like they were just loaded, and that like I'm bringing all this money in, and it started to create, the curiosity. And at that time, I think that era, the one thing that lit this whole thing on fire, that made it easier than ever, was social media. So now we have social media influencing the change and pushing us back into the 70s mindset, back into indie movement, that movement where it's like independent rights. I can do things on my own. And it was easier more than ever. So we had, the solo movement take over. We had suites galore. It was so easy. You could just go and, you could book clients right from Instagram. It was very easy to go on your own. You didn't have to worry about like leaving and not having your customers find you, because now you're not dependent on that salon. They can find you. So it made it so much easier to move towards independent. And at this point, we had, a season of having almost 80% of the market that went independent. And at the same time, color is now sitting closer to $11 a tube. So we're now adding more costs. And as those salon owners are now having the loyalty issues, right? They lost their senior staff. They now are trying to figure out factoring pricing, covering these costs. We're now sitting in a crazy problem. And on top of it, the world changed. We have pandemics and inflation that drastically changed. And even in the last kind of decade, when we look at it, the last decade alone, the color cost doubled in a fraction of the time. So what took almost like 50, 60 years only took like 5 years for us to double at that rate.
Exponentially.
That's how fast it went. And, ultimately it's supply and demand. And as those stylists, again, when the stylists went independent here in the last real 12 years, the loyalty started to break. And these, big brands that used to be loyal to shaking the hands of most commission-based salon owners started to allow independent stylists to use their brands as well.
I have a question about that, because it seems like a lot of this was influenced, like you said, by the brands, which is, I didn't know, the brands. Why do you think that they wanted all the stylists in commission salons before, to make it easier for distribution, but now they've accepted it? Why do you think they're not still actively trying to drive stylists back to commission salons?
I think that they still are, but the problem is the bigger you go, the farther you are away from reality, right? So the larger a corporation is, the more out of touch you are with your end user, right? Like if you have a major corporation coming in and telling you how you should run your business versus someone who's got just a small business like you, there's two different worlds there, right? And so I think that still to this day, every manufacturer on the planet would love everyone to just get back to commission-based salons, because it would make distribution, make everything easier, more predictive analysis, easier to understand supply and demand. But again, with this evolution of change, and, you know, quite frankly, what we look at it too is like our industry is also built off creativity, which means also our supply is also built off creativity, meaning everyone that's working in manufacturers and in all this, they're more creative on that creative side versus on the business side. So it's all about like, how do we just keep pushing more in? And that's like, how do we sell more into the salons versus what's being used in the salons, what's being used. So the common denominator on all of this is the cost of goods being used. What is actually being used to service? And am I covering what's being used? Am I spending more than I'm actually making? And when you look across this and you look at every single era and you look at the evolution, you look at everything changing, and now we're back in this kind of like mix, right? We're back in where salons who are commission-based salons have lower loyalty. Like they don't have as like senior staff are turning over a little faster. There's the independent movement that happened in the past decade, but there's this kind of independent or this movement towards hybrid. There's this movement towards still wanting that kind of culture-centric kind of business. And now, like the common thing is as we go back there, we now have a chance to change it, because we're now in a technological movement. We're in a data-backed movement. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, salon industry, mechanical industry, it doesn't matter what industry, we're all in a technical and a data-backed industry. So this is where the technology is going to help evolve us. And this is really where, when I went through the Eras tour, I realized just how valuable Salon Scale is. And that Salon Scale is simply a tool that ensures profitability at every transaction. It doesn't let you guess or stress. And most importantly, it's a secret to fixing the next decade, the next 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years. No salon owner will ever go through those types of movements by just adopting technology to improve and ensure that they're making money.
Yeah. And when you bring up the product fees, so those aren't really, some places they're illegal now. I would say rarely do I talk to a salon that still charges those for a lot of reasons. A lot of times the stylists think that, just like you were asking, like, well, what you're taking from me, why is my paycheck just this? And don't quite understand like how much it's costing. Or, a salon owner like you, if you felt that way as a commissioned stylist, well, maybe you want to go open your own salon now and you're like, I'm going to do things differently. I remember how product charges felt and I'm not having those in my salon. And then you get a few years in, you're like, not making money. So, if you're in that kind of pickle and you're looking for a way out, you promised this high commission, you were going to be the best place to work, no product costs or service fees, and you want to keep that commission, this is how you do it. You separate it out with Salon Scale. You charge the client directly for the product used, because that can't be part of the commission. That's eating your entire share of the profit as a salon. That's just, you can't overcome giving commission on that, a product that you have to replenish. And particularly just because, like you said, it's rising exponentially. Like the rate and it's not matching wages. Wages aren't doubling, every 10 years, but product is. And so how do you keep up with inflation without having to do these massive constant price increases? Is you have to separate it out, especially if you're giving commission on half of it. If the salon needs to make $5 more per service because of inflation and you're a commission salon, you actually need to raise your price $10. So how do you're going to, that would drive your clients away. So how do you kind of meet in the middle to make all parties happy? Is you have to separate it out.
Oh, what was the saying? Separate your parts from your labor to ensure your profit. It's like,
that doesn't sound right at all.
Wait, protect your profit.
Charge parts plus labor.
Listen, in the show notes, we'll give you what the quote is. There's two things. Yeah. Yes. Okay, so there's two things I want to kind of comment on here. Every salon owner runs their business like a speedboat. Like, that's what they do. And they're just full throttle with all their team. And like, look how awesome this is. Wham, wham, wham. And like, as soon as the first wave comes, it's like, whoa, they get a little shock. But that like kind of foundation, that water, and every time they shock, that's cash flow. And so although it might be fun and you're the driver of this thing and you're just going up and down all the time, as soon as you get a few people that leave and you start to really get into some rocky waters, you realize that you probably should have figured out how to protect what we call protect for not only what's going to come, the environments that are coming, but also the gas. Because if you're just full throttle, like eventually you're going to run out of money or steam, or like this is going to happen. Like every salon runs this way. And the reality is because every salon was kind of built off like the kind of the frustration that they left their last salon at. Mm-hmm. So they left because they felt they weren't compensated well enough. So it's the common conversation is all compensation and not having clarity around why you're compensated the way you are. That has been an evolution downfall for us, is we have not been clear on what it costs to operate our business. And therefore we've created a mess of the industry. And the simplest, clearest way is to separate those costs from the labor. The negotiation I have with my staff should only be on your time and your worth per time. But what it costs the business to keep the lights on and how to operate that is not on the table. That's not something that should be negotiated. It should just be ensured that it's being paid for. And no matter if inflation changes or we want to bring new things into the salon, that there is a pocket for that. Like there is something covering that in my pricing. And so I would say that the number one thing is that after looking through this and discovering, every era, every season is like, we're driven by creativity. We're driven by that fast momentum and just wanting to like get there. We just want to be the best. That sometimes it's better to kind of slow down and really factor in the foundational work in your business and really see like, what do I need to do in order to set my salon up for success for the next 5, 10, 15 years so that like I get what I invested my life towards. My life savings went into this business. I lost time with family. I lost time with friends. I put so much energy in that when you're sitting there lost, cashless, and you've just lost your second wave of stylists, like you start to question why you did all these things, right? And so like that all kind of comes into protecting your profit. Protecting your profit is protecting your peace. And that's exactly what you need to do. And the only thing you need to do is what we say, just go ahead and download Salon Scale.
That's the quote. I think Confucius said that.
Yeah, I think actually that's for sure. Honestly, just cover those costs. I think it's time to really make a massive trust fall into technology. No matter what it is, it's more efficient. It's cost effective. Like a lot of people worry about the expense of like a subscription, whether it's their booking software or Salon Scale or anything else. But really, like that is a far less expense than hiring someone full time to do things that a computer can do in seconds. Mm-hmm. So, at the end of the day, it's like, trust technology, and the salons that trust the technology are the ones that they're going to win. Yeah. And the ones that don't are the ones that will be left behind.
Yeah, I agree. No matter how you feel about it, technology scares me, but no matter how you feel about it, it's like if you don't embrace it, you're going to get left behind by those who do embrace it. And so get on board.
Yeah, and I mean it's not going to stop. Mm-hmm. And based off our deep dive of the Eras Tour, the Salon Eras Tour, and looking back at it, is one thing that was common, and you had made that comment here earlier, is that the products are never going to decrease. Mm-hmm. So they're always going to increase. So the product will always continue to rise. Commission models and structures may change and they might go, and the evolution of people wanting to work for someone or work for themselves might change, because that's just socially and culturally how we just adopt and change. But one foundation that can improve is to be very profit focused and give yourself something, because where things are going and the evolution of where things are going, we can start to see hair color double again here in a very short period of time.
It's crazy to think like in 10 years from now, these will be the good old days when like product was cheap, right? When we're thinking it's wildly expensive, like it's gone too far, but it's when we look back in 10 years from now, these will be prices were low.
I think the one thing is like, I definitely predict that there's going to be some massive changes there. But one wish or hope that I have is that in the future that, salon owners just there is no us and them conversation anymore. There's no salon owner versus staff. And there's like that gap changes, especially around compensation, because it's just clear. And everyone understands their financial models and they understand why we get paid what we're getting paid. And they align themselves with businesses that they, want to work for and support, and or start businesses that they want to keep growing. But I hope, and my pray is that is what happens in the future.
Well, are we ready to wrap this one up?
Here we go. I think that's it. I think we hit the 2025, and here we go.
We've terrified the crowd.
We'll see what happens. We'll see you in the next decade.
That's right.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for watching today, and make sure you subscribe.
Follow us today.
Like, comment, and subscribe is what I hear the people say.
Leave a review.
Leave a review. Only if it's a good one, though. If it's going to be a bad one, don't.